The founding of Rome is surrounded by myths and legends that reflect the beliefs and values of ancient Roman civilization. According to tradition, Rome was founded in 753 BC by Romulus and Remus, twin brothers who were the sons of Rhea Silvia and the god Mars, the god of war. Rhea Silvia was a Vestal virgin, which meant she was supposed to remain chaste, but she was forced to break her vows due to divine intervention. The birth of the twins was seen as a challenge to the throne of Alba Longa, so King Amulius, fearing a threat, ordered the boys to be abandoned in the Tiber River to die. However, the twins were miraculously saved by a she-wolf, who nursed and cared for them in a cave on the Palatine Hill, one of the 7 hills of Rome. Later, they were found and raised by a shepherd named Faustulus and his wife, Acca Larentia. This story of survival and divine protection strengthened the Romans' belief that their city was destined for greatness, protected by the gods from its inception. The she-wolf became a powerful symbol of Rome, representing strength, courage, and the protection of the gods. As the brothers grew, they discovered their royal origins and decided to avenge the injustice done to their mother and grandfather, King Numitor, who had been deposed by his brother Amulius. Romulus and Remus led an uprising, restoring Numitor to the throne of Alba Longa. After reinstating their grandfather, the twins decided to found a new city where they had been saved by the she-wolf. However, a dispute between the two brothers over the exact location of the city and who should govern it led to a tragic struggle. Romulus and Remus consulted the auguries to decide the site of the foundation, a common practice that involved interpreting signs from the gods, such as the flight of birds. When each interpreted the signs in a way that favored himself, the dispute intensified. Eventually, in a moment of anger, Romulus killed Remus, becoming the sole founder and first king of Rome. This tragic event marked the city's beginning with an act of fraternal violence, symbolizing both the determination and conflict that would characterize Rome's history. Romulus then began the construction of Rome, establishing the first institutions and laws. He created the Senate, composed of elders from Rome's leading families, which would become one of the city's longest-lasting institutions. To populate Rome, Romulus offered asylum to refugees, runaway slaves, and exiles, resulting in a diverse and growing population. However, the new settlement faced a critical shortage of women, essential to ensure the continuity and growth of the new city. To resolve this problem, Romulus orchestrated the famous rape of the Sabine women, inviting the Sabines, a neighboring people, to a religious festival, and then ordering that their women be abducted by the Romans. This act caused initial conflict but eventually led to the merging of the two communities, with the Sabines integrating into the Roman population. Thus, the legend of Romulus and Remus not only explains the founding of Rome, but also illustrates the idea that from the outset, Rome was a city of integration, conflict, and ambition. Romulus ruled until his death, which, according to legend, was marked by his mysterious disappearance, leading some to believe he had been transformed into a god. After Romulus, a succession of 6 kings ruled Rome, each contributing uniquely to the city's development. Numa Pompilius, the second king, is remembered for his focus on religion and spiritual practices, introducing various cults and religious institutions that established a strong spiritual foundation for Rome. Numa is also credited with creating the Roman calendar and establishing the Pontifex Maximus, one of the highest religious positions in Rome. His reign brought a period of peace and prosperity, differing from Romulus' militarism. Following Numa, the third king, Tullus Hostilius, brought a return to military expansionism. He is known for his aggressiveness in expanding Roman territory and for destroying Alba Longa, integrating its population into Rome. Tullus Hostilius strengthened Rome's military power, reinforcing its army and increasing its influence in the region. His reign ended abruptly after a series of disasters, which, according to legends, were caused by his neglect of religious duties. The fourth king, Ancus Marcius, Numa's grandson, combined his grandfather's religious traditions with the militarism of his predecessors. He expanded Roman territory and built Rome's first port at Ostia, strengthening trade and military routes. Ancus is also remembered for constructing the first bridge over the Tiber River, facilitating Rome's expansion beyond its initial borders. Ancus's blend of diplomacy and militarism helped consolidate Rome's control over neighboring peoples. The last three kings were of Etruscan origin, reflecting the strong cultural influence of the Etruscans on Rome during this period. Tarquin the Elder, the fifth king, is known for his public reforms, including the construction of the Circus Maximus, a large stadium for chariot races and public events. He also expanded the Senate and increased the number of knights, strengthening Rome's military institutions. Servius Tullius, the sixth king, is famous for his social and military reforms, including the creation of social classes based on wealth, a system that structured Roman society for centuries. The last king, Tarquin the Proud, ruled with tyranny and oppression, disregarding republican traditions and abusing his power. His reign was marked by scandals and despotism, culminating in the revolt led by Lucius Junius Brutus after the abuse of Lucretia, a noble Roman woman. This event outraged the population and precipitated the expulsion of Tarquin, marking the end of the monarchy and the birth of the Roman Republic in 509 BC. The transition from a monarchical regime to the Republic was a crucial turning point in Roman history, establishing a new system of government that would become a lasting model for the future. The creation of the office of consul, with annual terms and shared power, reflected the Romans' distrust of concentrated power in a single leader. This transition marked the beginning of a new era in Roman history, where political power would be shared and supervised, laying the foundations for Rome's growth as a dominant power in the ancient world. With the expulsion of Tarquin the Proud and the end of the monarchy in 509 BC, Rome began a new system of government, the Republic. The Roman Republic was built on the principle that power should not be concentrated in a single individual, but distributed among different bodies and magistracies. This new political model allowed for more collegial and participatory governance, where authority was shared and regulated by a series of carefully designed institutions. The central figure of this new structure was the Senate, an assembly of elders composed mainly of members of the patrician aristocracy, which played a crucial role in political and military decision-making. The consuls were the main executive figures of the Republic, elected annually from among the senators. Two consuls were chosen to serve jointly, ensuring that executive power was always shared, avoiding the possibility of a new tyranny. The consuls had broad powers, including command of the armies and administration of justice, but they also faced clear limits, such as the obligation to consult the Senate and the mutual right of veto. This duality of leadership was designed to prevent any one consul from becoming too powerful, promoting a continuous balance of power. Another crucial institution of the Republic was the Assembly of the Centuries, which gathered Roman citizens to elect magistrates and approve laws. The assembly was organized according to the wealth and status of citizens, with the wealthiest having more influence in voting. Although this structure favored the patrician elite, it also allowed for the participation of plebeians, who were the common class of Rome. The struggle for power between patricians and plebeians led to the development of other institutions, such as the tribunes of the plebs, who had the power to veto Senate decisions and protect the plebeians' interests against abuses. The struggle for political equality between patricians and plebeians was a recurring theme during the early centuries of the Republic. This conflict resulted in a series of reforms that gradually expanded the rights of plebeians, including the right to elect their own representatives, the tribunes of the plebs, and access to important magistracies. The publication of the Law of the 12 Tables in 450 BC, the first written code of laws in Rome, was a significant milestone in this struggle, as it provided a public and accessible legal basis for all citizens, reducing the patrician monopoly on legal knowledge. Rome's republican system, with its complex and interconnected institutions, provided a relatively stable and resilient governance environment for nearly 5 centuries. The magistracies and assemblies offered different paths for political participation, while the Senate, as the guiding force of the Republic, ensured continuity and a strategic vision for Rome's growth. This period saw Rome expand its domain, first over the Italian peninsula and then throughout the Mediterranean, transforming from a local city-state into a vast empire. The Republic, with all its victories and internal challenges, paved the way for the rise of the Roman Empire, which would emerge after the collapse of republican institutions. The Samnite Wars were a series of 3 conflicts fought between the Roman Republic and the Samnites, a warrior people inhabiting the mountainous region of central southern Italy. These conflicts were crucial for Rome's expansion in the Italian peninsula and for establishing its hegemony over other Italian peoples. The First Samnite War, 343–341 BC, began as a local confrontation over control of Campania, a rich and strategically important region. Rome, allied with the Campanians, intervened against the Samnites, resulting in a series of battles that ended with an armistice, allowing Rome to consolidate its influence in Campania. The Second Samnite War, 326–304 BC, was the longest and most decisive of the conflicts, marked by intense battles and complex strategies by both sides. During this period, the Romans suffered one of their greatest defeats at the Battle of the Caudine Forks in 321 BC, where a Roman army was ambushed and forced to surrender under humiliating conditions. This defeat, however, did not discourage Rome, which quickly regrouped, reformed its military tactics, and adopted the Manipular Legion, a more flexible formation that proved vital for future campaigns. Rome eventually won the war, imposing a favorable treaty that expanded its control over several cities in the region. The Third Samnite War, 298–290 BC, consolidated Roman power over the Italian peninsula. The Samnites, allied with other Italian peoples such as the Etruscans and Gauls, made a final stand against Roman expansion. The Battle of Sentinum in 295 BC was the decisive confrontation, where Roman forces, led by consuls Decius Mus and Fabius Rullianus, defeated the Samnite coalition, effectively ending Samnite resistance. With the victory, Rome solidified its hegemony in the peninsula, incorporating many of the defeated tribes and cities as allies or colonies, laying the groundwork for future expansions. The outcome of the Samnite Wars had far-reaching implications for Rome. The victory over the Samnites not only secured territorial expansion, but also tested and enhanced Rome's military and organizational capabilities. The Italian peninsula was unified under Roman leadership, with the various city-states and tribes subordinated to Rome's authority. This unification not only strengthened internal security, but also allowed Rome to project its power beyond Italy, initiating an era of expansion that would lead to confrontations with other great powers, including Carthage. The Punic Wars were a series of 3 conflicts between Rome and Carthage, a powerful city-state located on the northern coast of Africa. These wars were decisive for control of the Mediterranean and for the future of the Roman Republic as a global power. The First Punic War, 264–241 BC, began as a conflict over influence in Sicily, where Rome and Carthage supported opposing factions. The conflict quickly expanded to the sea, leading Rome to build a powerful navy despite its initial naval inexperience. The war culminated with the Battle of the Aegates Islands, where the Roman navy decisively defeated the Carthaginians, forcing them to sue for peace and cede Sicily to Rome. The Second Punic War, 218–201 BC, is perhaps the most famous of the Punic Wars, marked by the figure of Hannibal Barca, the brilliant Carthaginian general who led a daring invasion of Italy. Hannibal crossed the Alps with his army, including war elephants, surprising Rome and inflicting a series of devastating defeats in the battles of Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, where the Roman legions suffered one of the worst defeats in their history. Despite Hannibal's successes, he never managed to capture Rome, and the Roman strategy of attrition, along with the leadership of General Scipio Africanus, eventually led to a counter-invasion in Africa. The Battle of Zama in 202 BC sealed Hannibal's and Carthage's defeat, with Rome emerging as the dominant military force in the Mediterranean. The Third Punic War, 149–146 BC, was less a significant military conflict and more a prolonged siege of the city of Carthage, motivated by Rome's desire to eliminate Carthage as a potential threat forever. Fearing a Carthaginian resurgence, Rome launched a final attack that resulted in the complete destruction of the city. The Romans besieged Carthage for 3 years before finally capturing and destroying it in 146 BC. The surviving Carthaginians were enslaved, and Carthage's territory was turned into the Roman province of Africa, marking the end of Carthaginian power. The Punic Wars transformed Rome from an Italian regional power into an empire with uncontested dominance over the Western Mediterranean. The destruction of Carthage eliminated a commercial and military rival, paving the way for Roman expansion into Africa, Hispania, and eventually the Eastern Mediterranean. The impact of these wars was also reflected internally, with the influx of wealth, lands, and slaves, transforming Roman society and creating new social and political tensions that would eventually contribute to the crises of the Republic. Rome's conquest of Greece was a gradual process that extended over several decades, culminating in 146 BC with Rome's victory over Macedonia and subsequent domination of Greece. Roman influence in the region began to intensify after the Punic Wars when Rome, now a dominant power in the Western Mediterranean, turned its attention eastward. The wars against Macedonia, which began in 214 BC during the reign of Philip I, were initially part of an effort to curb Macedonian ambitions and protect Roman interests in the region. However, over time, these conflicts evolved into a campaign of total conquest. Rome's decisive victory came at the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC, where Roman forces, led by Lucius Aemilius Paulus, defeated the Macedonian army of King Perseus. This victory marked the end of the Third Macedonian War and led to the dissolution of the Macedonian kingdom, which was divided into 4 separate republics under Roman control. Rome's influence in Greece continued to expand, with interventions in internal conflicts and the establishment of alliances with Greek city-states. This policy culminated in the complete subjugation of Greece following the Achaean League's revolt against Rome. In 146 BC, the Achaean League, led a coalition of Greek cities, attempted to resist Roman domination, resulting in a war that ended with the destruction of Corinth by Rome. The city was sacked, and its inhabitants were sold into slavery, serving as a warning of what happened to those who defied Roman power. With the fall of Corinth, Greece was officially integrated into the Roman Empire as the province of Achaia. Rome adopted many Greek practices and cultures but ruled with a firm hand, maintaining a military presence to prevent future rebellions. The conquest of Greece had a profound impact on both Rome and the Greek world. Culturally, Greek influence intensified in Rome, with Greek art, philosophy, and literature being widely adopted and celebrated. The Romans admired Greece's cultural sophistication but kept strict vigilance over its political and military activities. Roman domination brought a period of relative peace and stability to Greece, though at the cost of the independence and autonomy that Greek city-states had enjoyed for centuries. Economically, Rome's conquest of Greece resulted in a significant influx of wealth into Rome. Greek works of art, treasures, and slaves flooded the Roman market, contributing to the increase in luxury and consumption among the Roman elite. However, this affluence also brought challenges, including a greater reliance on slave labor and increased social inequalities within Rome. The domination of Greece was a milestone in Roman imperial expansion, establishing Rome as the hegemonic power in the Eastern Mediterranean and paving the way for future conquests in Asia Minor and the East. Firmianti's times, the reforms of the Gracchi brothers marked one of the most tumultuous periods in the history of the Roman Republic, characterized by growing social tensions, internal struggles, and the onset of a series of civil wars that would eventually lead to the collapse of the Republic. Tiberius Gracchus, elected tribune of the plebs in 133 BC, sought to implement agrarian reforms to address the growing social inequality and concentration of land in the hands of a few aristocrats. His proposal, the Lex Sempronia Agraria, aimed to redistribute public land to poor citizens, especially war veterans who were increasingly marginalized. Tiberius Gracchus' proposal met strong resistance in the Senate, which was mainly composed of aristocrats who directly benefited from holding large tracts of land. To bypass the senatorial opposition, Tiberius used his veto power and the plebeian assembly to pass his reforms, which was seen as a direct affront to the traditional power of the Senate. Tensions reached their peak when Tiberius sought re-election as tribune, a move considered illegal and threatening by the senators. In 133 BC, during a riot organized by his opponents, Tiberius was assassinated, along with many of his supporters, marking one of the first acts of open political violence in the Republic. After Tiberius's death, his younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, took up the cause of reform. He was elected tribune of the plebs in 123 BC and proposed a series of even more extensive reforms that included not only land redistribution, but also grain subsidies for the poor, the extension of citizenship rights to Rome's Italian allies, and judicial reforms to reduce corruption. Gaius sought to weaken the Senate's influence by strengthening the popular assemblies and increasing the control of the tribunes over finances and public policies. His reforms aimed to create a broader base of support among the plebeians and other marginalized groups. However, Gaius Gracchus' reforms also faced strong opposition, not only from the Senate but also from some sectors of the plebs who felt threatened by the proposed changes. The tension culminated in 121 BC, when Gaius and his supporters became involved in violent confrontations with senatorial forces. Surrounded by enemies and lacking sufficient support, Gaius Gracchus committed suicide, and many of his followers were killed or exiled. The deaths of the Gracchi brothers marked a turning point, showing that the use of violence and intimidation had become an acceptable means of resolving political disputes in Rome. The reforms of the Gracchi brothers and the subsequent internal struggles revealed deep fissures in Roman society, particularly between the senatorial elite and the lower classes. The failure of the reforms exacerbated social tensions and set a precedent for future violent political struggles, contributing to the instability that would characterize the final years of the Republic. The civil wars, which erupted largely as a result of these unresolved tensions, would eventually lead to the end of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire under Augustus. The Spartacus Rebellion, also known as the Third Servile War, was one of the largest and most significant slave revolts in Roman history. Led by Spartacus, a gladiator of Thracian origin who had been captured and forced into slavery, the rebellion began in 73 BC in southern Italy. Spartacus and a group of about 70 gladiators escaped from a gladiatorial school in Capua, arming themselves with kitchen utensils and improvised weapons. Soon, other slaves joined the group, and the revolt quickly grew, transforming into a massive movement against the Roman slave system. Under Spartacus's charismatic and strategic leadership, the rebels achieved several notable victories against the Roman legions sent to suppress them. Spartacus demonstrated exceptional tactical skills, using his knowledge of the terrain and the mobility of his army to defeat larger Roman forces. He managed to mobilize an army of over 70,000 slaves, including men, women, and children, and traveled across much of the Italian peninsula, looting and defeating Roman forces along the way. His initial vision was to lead the rebels northward beyond the Alps, where they could escape Roman jurisdiction. Despite their initial successes, Spartacus's movement began to face internal challenges, including dissent over the direction and strategy of the revolt. Some of his followers preferred to continue looting Italy rather than flee beyond the Alps, while others hoped to achieve freedom in Sicily or other parts of the Mediterranean. This deviation from the original plans allowed Rome to gain time to organize a more effective military response. In 71 BC, the Roman forces under the command of Marcus Licinius Crassus finally managed to corner and defeat Spartacus and his followers at the Battle of the Silarus River. The defeat of Spartacus was brutal, and many of the survivors of the rebellion were crucified along the Appian Way, a terrifying demonstration of Rome's power and a warning to other slaves about the consequences of rebellion. Although Spartacus was killed in battle and the revolt was crushed, the impact of the rebellion resonated in Rome for a long time. The revolt highlighted the deep social inequalities and Rome's growing dependence on slave labor, planting seeds of unrest that would continue to affect Roman society in the following years. Spartacus became a symbol of resistance against oppression, a mythical figure who would inspire future stories and revolts. The first triumvirate was an informal political alliance between three of the most powerful men in Rome: Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Formed in 60 BC, the triumvirate emerged at a time of growing political instability and internal disputes in the Roman Republic. Each of the members brought their own ambitions and resources to the alliance, seeking to use this collaboration to advance their personal interests in a political landscape dominated by senatorial rivalries and power struggles. Julius Caesar, a talented general and politician, sought support for his military campaigns and political aspirations. Pompey, one of Rome's most respected generals, sought legitimation for his conquests in the East and settlements for his veterans. Crassus, the richest man in Rome, wanted to increase his prestige and influence, especially in the East. The alliance was sealed through a secret pact outside the official institutions of Rome, demonstrating how weakened the republican system had become. By combining their resources, influence, and networks of patronage, the triumvirate dominated Roman politics, electing their allies to key positions and passing legislation that favored their interests. One of the triumvirate's first actions was to secure Caesar's election as consul in 59 BC, a position he used to implement reforms that benefited his partners, including land redistribution for Pompey's veterans and financial concessions that favored Crassus. Although the triumvirate initially succeeded, the alliance began to disintegrate due to personal rivalries and political differences. The death of Crassus in 53 BC during the disastrous military campaign against the Parthians at the Battle of Carrhae was a significant blow to the triumvirate, removing the balance of power between Caesar and Pompey. With Crassus out of the scene, tensions between Caesar and Pompey increased, exacerbated by political disagreements and Caesar's growing popularity and military power, which he was gaining through his campaigns in Gaul. The collapse of the triumvirate culminated in an open civil war between Caesar and Pompey, each seeking exclusive control of Rome. In 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon, an act of direct defiance against the Senate and Pompey. This event marked the beginning of one of the most dramatic phases of Roman history, the civil war that would eventually overthrow the Republic. At that time, the Rubicon was a small river that marked the boundary between Cisalpine Gaul, which was under Caesar's command, and Italy proper, where Rome's power resided. According to Roman law, a general could not cross the Rubicon with his armed troops without the Senate's permission, as this would be considered an act of war against Rome. However, facing opposition from the Senate and his former ally Pompey, Caesar decided to challenge this rule. By crossing the Rubicon, Caesar uttered the famous words, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast, indicating that there was no turning back and that civil war was inevitable. This act was motivated by a combination of personal ambitions and political pressures. After his successful campaigns in Gaul, Caesar had accumulated wealth, influence, and a loyal army, which provoked the jealousy and fear of the Roman Senate, particularly Pompey, who now aligned against him. The Senate, under Pompey's influence, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, a command that Caesar interpreted as a direct threat to his power and safety. Caesar's advance on Rome was swift and decisive, catching Pompey and the Senate off guard. Pompey, who was not prepared for an immediate war, withdrew to southern Italy and then to Greece, where he hoped to gather his forces and eastern allies. Caesar, in turn, entered Rome unopposed and began to consolidate his control over the city and its institutions. He quickly established himself as the de facto ruler of Rome, but the conflict was far from over. The civil war extended over several years, with battles taking place in various parts of the Roman world. The civil war culminated in the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC, where Caesar decisively defeated Pompey's forces. Pompey fled to Egypt, but was assassinated on the orders of Pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, who hoped to gain favor with Caesar. However, Caesar was enraged by the assassination of his former rival, and, instead of rewarding Ptolemy, became involved in the dynastic disputes of Egypt, supporting Cleopatra. The alliance between Caesar and Cleopatra quickly became both political and romantic. Caesar, who recognized the wealth and strategic importance of Egypt, saw Cleopatra as a valuable ally. In return for his support, he helped Cleopatra defeat Ptolemy III and consolidate her power as the sole ruler of Egypt. After her victory over her brother, Cleopatra was restored to the throne and co-ruled with her other brother, Ptolemy XIV. although she held absolute control in practice. The relationship between Caesar and Cleopatra resulted in the birth of a son, Ptolemy XV, better known as Caesarion, whose paternity Cleopatra claimed to be Caesar's. Caesar continued to eliminate his remaining adversaries in various campaigns throughout the Mediterranean, consolidating his control and returning to Rome as the uncontested leader. With Caesar's victory, the civil war effectively ended the Roman Republic. Caesar assumed the title of Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life, accumulating powers that were previously divided among the various republican magistracies. He implemented a series of reforms, including the reorganization of the Roman calendar, the expansion of the Senate, and measures to centralize power. However, his actions also created a deep divide between those who saw him as a savior of Roman order and those who considered him a tyrant destroying republican traditions. The assassination of Julius Caesar on March 15, 44 BC, known as the Ides of March, was one of the most iconic and tragic events in Roman history, symbolizing the final resistance of the Republican faction against growing tyranny. The conspiracy to assassinate Caesar was led by a group of senators that included Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, both former allies of Caesar, who felt compelled to act against what they saw as unprecedented abuse of power. Caesar, who had recently declared himself Dictator Perpetuo, was consolidating total control over the Roman government, marginalizing traditional republican institutions and fueling fears that he would proclaim himself king. The conspirators, who called themselves liberators, believed that by assassinating Caesar, they could restore the republic and the freedoms it represented. They claimed to act in defense of republican tradition, and their conspiracy was deeply personal, especially for Brutus, who was widely regarded as an adopted son of Caesar and with whom Caesar had a close relationship. Brutus's participation in the assassination was particularly symbolic, highlighting the treacherous and dramatic nature of the conspiracy. On the day of the assassination, Caesar was lured to a Senate meeting in Pompey's theater, where the conspirators surrounded him. Without any bodyguards, Caesar was attacked by more than 60 senators. According to historical accounts, he was stabbed 23 times, with the assassins striking in a disordered and chaotic manner. The famous phrase, "Et tu, Brute," and "you, Brutus," attributed to Caesar during the attack, although possibly apocryphal, encapsulates the profound betrayal he felt at being attacked by those he considered close allies. However, the assassination of Caesar did not have the desired effect by the conspirators. Instead of restoring the Republic, his death plunged Rome into another cycle of civil wars. The Roman people, who had benefited from Caesar's reforms and admired his military success, were outraged by the assassination. Caesar's funeral, organized by Mark Antony, was a tumultuous event, where the reading of his will, in which he left legacies to the people of Rome, further inflamed tensions. Antony used the public's emotions to position himself as the heir to Caesar's legacy, inciting anger against the conspirators. After Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, Rome plunged into another period of turmoil and civil war. The Republic, already weakened by decades of internal conflicts, now faced a new power struggle between Caesar's followers and his assassins. In 43 BC, to consolidate control and avenge Caesar's death, three of his most influential allies formed the Second Triumvirate: Octavian, his great-nephew and adopted heir; Mark Antony, one of Caesar's most loyal generals; and Lepidus, another Caesarian general with significant military influence. Unlike the First Triumvirate, which was an informal alliance, the Second Triumvirate was formally legalized by the Roman Senate, granting these three men virtually absolute power to govern and restructure the Republic. The initial goal of the Second Triumvirate was to eliminate the conspirators responsible for Caesar's death and consolidate power among the three leaders. One of their first actions was the proscription of their political enemies, a brutal practice involving the execution of opponents and the confiscation of their properties. This wave of violence targeted both Caesar's assassins and other political foes, resulting in the deaths of notable figures, such as Cicero, the famous orator and senator who opposed Mark Antony. With their finances bolstered by confiscated wealth, the triumvirate launched a military campaign against Brutus and Cassius, the main conspirators in Caesar's assassination, defeating them at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. With their main enemies eliminated, the triumvirate divided the Roman provinces among themselves to facilitate governance. Mark Antony received the eastern provinces, where he established his power base in Egypt and forged an alliance with Cleopatra. Lepidus, with less influence, was relegated to the governance of the African provinces. Octavian, in turn, controlled the western provinces, including Italy, giving him direct access to Rome and popular support. However, this division of power soon proved unstable. Tensions between Octavian and Mark Antony grew, as both sought to consolidate their individual power and prepared for an inevitable confrontation. The alliance began to disintegrate when Octavian skillfully worked to undermine Lepidus's position, forcing him to withdraw from active politics and assume a ceremonial role. With Lepidus effectively neutralized, only Octavian and Mark Antony remained as the main contenders for control of Rome. The rivalry between them was exacerbated by Antony's relationship with Cleopatra, which Octavian used to portray Antony as a traitor to Rome, more loyal to Egypt than to his homeland. Octavian launched an effective propaganda campaign against Antony, accusing him of plotting to divide the empire and establish an Eastern dynasty with Cleopatra. The tension between Octavian and Mark Antony culminated in the Battle of Actium, fought in 31 BC off the coast of Greece, near Actium. This was the decisive confrontation that would determine Rome's future. Mark Antony and Cleopatra commanded a large fleet, composed mainly of heavy Egyptian warships, while Octavian, under the leadership of his naval commander Agrippa, led a smaller but more agile fleet with superior strategy. Despite Antony and Cleopatra having an initial advantage in numbers, they were outmaneuvered by Agrippa's superior tactics, who managed to cut Antony's supply lines and force him into a defensive position. During the battle, Cleopatra, realizing the tide was turning against them, decided to withdraw her fleet and return to Egypt. Torn between his military duty and his love for Cleopatra, Antony made the fatal mistake of following the queen, abandoning his forces on the battlefield. This move demoralized his men and handed victory to Octavian, who captured or destroyed the remainder of Antony's fleet. The defeat at Actium was catastrophic for Antony and Cleopatra, sealing their fate and allowing Octavian to consolidate his control over Rome and its territories. After the battle, Octavian pursued Antony and Cleopatra to Egypt. In 30 BC, surrounded and with no hope of escape, Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide, Antony by falling on his own sword, and Cleopatra, according to legend, by allowing herself to be bitten by a poisonous snake. With their deaths, Octavian annexed Egypt as a Roman province, further increasing the wealth and power of Rome. Octavian's victory at Actium and the subsequent consolidation of Egypt were crucial steps in ending the civil war and transforming Rome from a republic weakened by internal conflicts into a centralized empire under the control of a single leader. With Octavian's final victory, he emerged as the uncontested ruler of Rome, and in 27 BC, he was granted the title of Augustus, becoming the first Roman emperor. The Battle of Actium not only marked the end of the Second Triumvirate and the Civil Wars, but also the birth of the Roman Empire, a new chapter in Rome's history that would last for over 4 centuries in the West and more than 1,000 years in the East. Octavian's ability to manipulate rivalries and use his adversaries' weaknesses for his own gain established him as one of the greatest leaders in Roman history. Octavian's rise to absolute power marked the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire, one of the most influential and enduring periods in world history. In 27 BC, after years of civil wars and instability, Octavian took the title Augustus, meaning the Venerable or the Exalted, granted by the Senate in recognition of his role in bringing peace and restoring order. Although Augustus avoided openly using the titles king or dictator, preferring the title or princeps or first citizen, his authority was virtually unlimited, marking the beginning of the Principate, the first phase of the Roman Empire. Augustus carefully shaped his image as a restorer of Roman traditions and a defender of the Republic, while in practice concentrating power in his hands. He maintained the appearances of republican institutions, such as the Senate and the assemblies, but his personal authority and control over the army gave him effective power over all aspects of government. He reformed the administrative system, reorganized public finances and the tax system, and implemented policies to revitalize Roman morality and religion, encouraging a return to the traditional virtues that he believed were fundamental to Rome's greatness. One of Augustus's main achievements was the restructuring of the Roman military forces. He reduced the size of the legions and established military service as a professional career, with guaranteed pensions in land or money, which increased the soldiers' loyalty to the emperor. The Praetorian Guard, an elite force that served as his personal guard, was also established, reinforcing his security and presence in Rome. Augustus consolidated the empire's borders, favoring stabilization over aggressive expansion, and avoided unnecessary military campaigns that could destabilize the newly unified empire. In addition to his administrative and military reforms, Augustus sponsored extensive building programs that transformed the urban landscape of Rome and other cities in the empire. He claimed to have found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble, with temples, aqueducts, roads, and public buildings that not only improved urban infrastructure, but also symbolized the power and grandeur of his regime. Monuments such as the Altar of Peace, Ara Pacis, celebrated the Pax Romana, the peace and prosperity that he brought to the Roman world. Augustus's rise was a decisive turning point in Roman history, transforming it from a volatile republic to a stable empire under the leadership of a single ruler. His reign, which lasted until his death in AD 14, established a model of imperial governance that would be followed by his successors for centuries. The era of Augustus was marked by a combination of absolute power and the spread of peace, prosperity, and cultural renewal, laying the foundations for the peak of the Roman Empire. The Pax Romana, or Roman peace, was a period of approximately 200 years of relative peace and stability throughout the Roman Empire, beginning with Augustus's reign and lasting until the end of the 2nd century AD. This period is often considered the golden age of the empire, characterized by economic expansion, political stability, cultural growth, and a significant increase in the quality of life for many of the empire's citizens. The Pax Romana was made possible by centralized governance, efficient imperial administration, and the Roman military's power, which kept the borders secure and suppressed internal revolts. During the Pax Romana, trade flourished throughout the Mediterranean and beyond, facilitated by an exceptionally well-built and protected road network that connected the empire's various provinces. The trade of goods such as wheat, olive oil, wine, textiles, and spices drove the economy, while cities across the empire benefited from infrastructure developments like aqueducts, theaters, and public baths. The security of overland and maritime trade routes under Roman protection ensured a steady flow of goods and ideas, contributing to economic prosperity and the cultural integration of the various regions under Roman control. Politically, the Roman administration during the Pax Romana was highly organized and efficient, with provincial governors appointed by the emperor responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and enforcing Roman law. This administrative system allowed effective control over a vast territory that stretched from Britain to the Middle East, and from the deserts of North Africa to the rivers of Germania. Roman citizenship was gradually extended to more people within the empire, creating a sense of unity and identity among the inhabitants of distant regions. Culturally, the Pax Romana was a period of great artistic, literary, and architectural flourishing. Roman cities became centers of cultural and social life, with large public works, temples, libraries, and amphitheaters that reflected Roman power and culture. Literature also thrived, with poets like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid, creating works that celebrated Rome's greatness and the values of the Augustan regime. Stoic philosophy, with its emphasis on virtue, reason, and duty, gained popularity among the educated classes, influencing both the ruling elite and ordinary citizens. Despite the relative peace, the Pax Romana was not without conflicts. The empire faced challenges at its borders, such as invasions by Germanic tribes and conflicts with the Parthians in the east. However, the well-trained and disciplined Roman legions were generally able to handle these threats, maintaining the empire's territorial integrity. Internally, imperial succession occasionally caused tension and dispute, but most emperors of this period, starting with Augustus and including rulers like Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius, managed to maintain order and continue the policies that sustained peace and prosperity. The Pax Romana gradually ended in the late 2nd century AD, when the empire began to face increasing internal problems, including economic crises, border pressures, and political instability. However, the legacy of this period of stability and prosperity continued to influence the culture and history of the Western world for centuries, symbolizing an era when Roman order and civilization reached its peak. The Pax Romana left a lasting impact, shaping the vision of what Rome represented, a civilizing power that brought peace, law, and infrastructure to vast regions of the ancient world. The Julio-Claudian dynasty was the first imperial dynasty of Rome, founded by Augustus and followed by a succession of emperors that included Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. This period was characterized by a mix of stability and scandals, achievements and excesses, and marked the first steps of the Roman Empire under the autocratic government system established by Augustus. After Augustus's death, Tiberius, AD 14-37, his stepson, took the throne. Tiberius was a skilled military commander, but his reign was marked by suspicion, betrayal, and an increasing withdrawal from public life. He governed efficiently, but with growing paranoia and repression, especially during his later years when he retired to the island of Capri, leaving governance in the hands of his ministers, whose arbitrary and corrupt actions tainted his administration. Tiberius died under mysterious circumstances, possibly assassinated, and was succeeded by Caligula, his great-nephew. Caligula, AD 37-41, initially celebrated for his charisma and promises to restore authority to the Senate, quickly revealed himself to be an unstable and tyrannical ruler. His eccentricity and cruelty made his short reign infamous in Roman history. Caligula squandered the public treasury on extravagant projects, such as the construction of enormous palaces and grand games, and engaged in feudal conflicts with the Senate and other members of the Roman elite. His erratic conduct, including the alleged desire to be worshipped as a god and his acts of public humiliation against senators and citizens, culminated in his assassination by members of his own Praetorian Guard, desperate to restore order. After Caligula's assassination, Claudius, AD 41-54, Caligula's uncle and initially considered an unlikely candidate due to his physical disabilities and lack of military experience, was proclaimed emperor by the Praetorian Guard. Claudius surprised many with his administrative competence and interest in governance. He expanded the empire, including the annexation of Britain, and carried out important reforms in administration and the judicial system. Claudius was also known for his work in building infrastructures, such as aqueducts and ports. However, his personal life was tumultuous, marked by palace intrigues and family conflicts, which culminated in his alleged assassination by his fourth wife, Agrippina, who sought to place her son Nero on the throne. Nero, AD 54-68, the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, is remembered both for his excesses and cruelty and for his patronage of the arts. Initially advised by competent tutors like the philosopher Seneca, Nero began his reign with some popular measures and reforms. However, he quickly indulged in a hedonistic lifestyle, with arbitrary executions of his opponents, including his own mother, Agrippina. The Great Fire of Rome, which occurred in AD 64, was one of the most devastating disasters in the city's history, destroying much of the capital of the Roman Empire. The fire started on the night of July 18th in the densely populated neighborhoods near the Circus Maximus and quickly spread, fueled by strong winds and the narrow, flammable wooden structures that dominated the urban landscape. For 6 days, the fire consumed Rome, destroying entire neighborhoods, temples, and public buildings before finally being controlled. It is estimated that 2/3 of the city were damaged or destroyed, leaving thousands homeless. Emperor Nero, who was at his residence in Antium at the start of the fire, returned to Rome to organize relief efforts. He opened his gardens and properties to house the homeless and reduce the price of grain to feed the affected population. However, rumors began to circulate that Nero might have been responsible for the fire, allegedly to clear land for the construction of his new palace, the luxurious Domus Aurea. The popular legend that Nero played the lyre while Rome burned, although probably apocryphal, captured the perception of his indifference and extravagance in the face of public suffering. To divert suspicion from himself, Nero sought a scapegoat and turned his attention to the Christians, a relatively new and unpopular religious group in pagan Rome. He accused the Christians of starting the fire, sparking one of the first major persecutions against them. Many Christians were arrested, tortured, and executed in brutal ways, with some being burned alive, crucified, or thrown to the beasts in public spectacles. This persecution not only increased fear and hostility against Christians, but also solidified Nero's reputation as a cruel tyrant. After the fire, Nero embarked on an ambitious reconstruction program to transform Rome. He implemented new building regulations to prevent future fires, such as the use of less flammable materials and the imposition of wider spaces between buildings. The city was partially redesigned, with wider streets and the creation of larger public areas. However, these measures were not enough to restore Nero's popularity, and the cost of reconstruction, along with his increasingly oppressive policies and erratic management, led to growing discontent among the elite and the people of Rome. The Great Fire of Rome is often remembered not only as an urban disaster, but also as a symbol of Nero's mismanagement and the decline of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. The events following the fire contributed to the collapse of public confidence in Nero, fostering revolts that would culminate in his deposition and suicide in AD 68. The fire and its aftermath marked a turning point in Roman history, highlighting the city's vulnerabilities and the need for stable and effective leadership to preserve the empire's integrity. The Jewish Revolt, also known as the Great Jewish Revolt, was one of the most significant and destructive conflicts between Rome and its provincial territories, occurring from AD 66 to 73 in the province of Judea. The conflict had its roots in a long period of political, religious, and economic tensions between the Jews of the region and the Roman government. Growing dissatisfaction with Roman administration, marked by high taxes, corruption, and a lack of respect for Jewish religious practices, culminated in an open uprising in AD 66, when a group of Jewish zealots, driven by nationalist and religious fervor, took control of Jerusalem and expelled the Roman garrison. Rome's initial response was slow, but in AD 67, General Vespasian was sent to suppress the revolt with a large army. He began a systematic campaign to recapture the region, advancing slowly to encircle and isolate centers of resistance. The well-trained and disciplined Roman forces retook several Jewish cities and fortresses along the way, including the crucial city of Jotapata, where the Jewish leader and historian Flavius Josephus was captured. Vespasian, demonstrating a combination of military skill and political pragmatism, used prolonged sieges, crop destruction, and negotiations to weaken Jewish resistance. In AD 69, Vespasian was called back to Rome due to the political chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors, leaving the war's conclusion in the hands of his son, Titus. Titus continued the siege of Jerusalem, which culminated in AD 70 with the capture and destruction of the city, including the Temple of Jerusalem, a central symbol of Jewish identity. The fall of Jerusalem was marked by extreme brutality, with reports of high casualties, starvation, and enslavement. The destruction of the temple had a profound and lasting impact on Jewish history, marking the beginning of the Jewish diaspora and the end of the temple's centrality in Jewish religious life. Jewish resistance continued in some fortresses, such as Masada, which became a symbol of desperate resistance. In AD 73, after a prolonged siege, Roman forces finally took Masada, where they found that the defenders had taken their own lives to avoid capture. The Jewish revolt had devastating consequences for Judea. Cities and villages were destroyed, the population was decimated, and many Jews were enslaved or exiled. Rome consolidated its control over the region, and Judea was downgraded from a province with some autonomy to a territory under direct and strict Roman supervision. The impact of the revolt reverberated throughout Jewish and Roman history. For Rome, the victory was a testament to its ability to maintain control over its provinces despite stubborn resistance. The triumph was celebrated in Rome with the Arch of Titus, which commemorated the victory and displayed the spoils of the Temple of Jerusalem. For the Jews, the revolt and the subsequent destruction of the temple represented a spiritual and national catastrophe, permanently altering the course of Jewish history, with a greater focus on synagogues and the Torah as the center of religious life. Rishtaina Jewisai, the Flavian dynasty, succeeded the turbulent era of the Year of the Four Emperors and brought a period of relative stability and consolidation to the Roman Empire. The dynasty was founded by Vespasian, who ascended to power in AD 69 after a year of civil war that saw the quick rise and fall of Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. Vespasian, an experienced and pragmatic general, was proclaimed emperor by his legions in the east, and quickly moved to assert control over the empire. His reign marked the beginning of an economic and administrative recovery for Rome, which had suffered under the mismanagement and excesses of previous emperors. Vespasian, AD 69-79, focused on restoring discipline and stability within the army, replenishing the imperial treasury, and rebuilding Rome after the damages suffered during the Great Fire and civil unrest. He was known for his frugality and for imposing strict fiscal measures to increase state revenue. Besides his administrative and economic reforms, Vespasian also initiated significant construction projects, including the start of the Colosseum, which would become one of the most enduring symbols of Roman power. His government was widely considered efficient and beneficial, providing a solid foundation for his successors. After Vespasian's death, his son Titus, AD 79-81, took the throne. Titus was popular among both the army and the Roman people, partly due to his successful campaign in Judea and his role as the architect of the Arch of Titus. However, his reign was marked by natural disasters, including the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79, which destroyed the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, and a great fire in Rome. Despite these challenges, Titus distinguished himself through his generosity and compassion, providing aid and reconstruction to the disaster victims, which earned him the respect and admiration of the people. His reign, although short, is remembered as one of the most benevolent of the dynasty. Domitian, AD 81-96, Titus's younger brother, was the last of the Flavians to rule and had a more controversial reign. Domitian consolidated imperial power and expanded the empire's borders, but his administration was marked by authoritarian rule and an increasing personality cult. He proclaimed himself Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, and expected to be treated as such, which alienated the Senate and the Roman aristocracy. His foreign policy was aggressive, with military campaigns in Britain and against Germanic and Dacian tribes, securing some victories but also exposing the empire to new threats. Internally, Domitian implemented administrative and fiscal reforms that benefited the empire's management, but his rule became increasingly oppressive, with frequent accusations of treason and summary executions of his opponents. The atmosphere of fear and suspicion at the end of his reign culminated in a palace conspiracy that resulted in his assassination in AD 96. Domitian was killed by members of his own guard and court conspirators, marking the end of the Flavian dynasty. After Domitian's assassination, the Senate quickly condemned his memory, damnatio memoriae, and a new emperor, Nerva, was chosen, initiating the Antonine dynasty. The Flavian dynasty left a mixed legacy. While Vespasian and Titus are remembered for their competence and popularity, Domitian is often seen as a tyrant whose actions precipitated the dynasty's end. However, the Flavian period consolidated important advances in imperial administration and infrastructure, maintaining the empire's cohesion during a time of internal and external challenges. The construction of the Colosseum, also known as the Flavian Amphitheater, was initiated by Emperor Vespasian in AD 70 and completed by his son Titus in AD 80, with some additional modifications made by Emperor Domitian. The Colosseum quickly became one of the most recognizable symbols of Roman power and culture, standing as the largest amphitheater ever built in the ancient world, with a capacity of approximately 50,000 to 80,000 spectators. Located in the heart of Rome, the monument was erected on a site previously occupied by the artificial lake of Nero's extravagant palace, the Domus Aurea, symbolizing the return of public space to the Roman people and marking the beginning of a new era under the Flavian dynasty. The Colosseum was designed to host a variety of public events, including gladiatorial combats, hunts of exotic animals, public executions, and reenactments of famous battles, which served both to entertain the population and to demonstrate Rome's military prowess and engineering skills. The Colosseum's structure was innovative for its time, with a complex system of arches, multiple entrances to facilitate the flow of spectators, and a sophisticated network of underground tunnels and chambers, known as the Hypogeum, where gladiators and animals were kept before being elevated to the arena through a series of elevators and ramps. Architecturally, the Colosseum utilized a combination of materials such as travertine, tuff, and concrete, reflecting the Roman mastery of engineering and construction. Its rows of superimposed arches and Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns not only demonstrated the aesthetic appeal of the monument, but also its structural functionality. The Colosseum featured a retractable awning system called the Velarium, which could be extended to protect spectators from the sun, showing concern for the comfort of attendees. These architectural and functional elements made the Colosseum a marvel of design and a model for future amphitheaters throughout the empire. Beyond its role as an entertainment venue, the Colosseum also played an important part in Roman politics and social life. The games and spectacles were often sponsored by emperors or other prominent figures as a way to gain public favor and demonstrate generosity. During these events, the people of Rome could enjoy days of free entertainment, including food and drink, reinforcing the bond between the emperor and the people and helping maintain social order through bread and circuses. A public distraction strategy that helped divert attention from more serious political and economic issues. The inauguration of the Colosseum in AD 80 was celebrated with games that lasted 100 consecutive days, during which, according to historical accounts, thousands of wild animals were killed and countless gladiators fought to the death. The magnitude and brutality of these spectacles served to display Rome's grandeur, both in terms of its resources and its willingness to exercise control over life and death. Despite centuries of use and the impact of earthquakes and plundering, the Colosseum remains one of the most impressive testaments to Roman skill and ambition, attracting millions of visitors each year as an enduring icon of imperial power. The Antonine dynasty was one of the most successful and stable periods in the history of the Roman Empire, spanning the reigns of several notable emperors who ruled from 96 to 192 AD. This period is often remembered as a peak of political stability, economic prosperity, and territorial expansion, under a series of rulers who were seen as good emperors. The dynasty began with Nerva, an elderly senator chosen by the Senate to restore order after the tumultuous reign of Domitian, the last of the Flavians. Nerva established an important precedent by adopting a successor based on merit, choosing the popular general Trajan to succeed him. Trajan, 98–117 AD, is remembered as one of the greatest Roman emperors, responsible for the empire's greatest territorial expansion. Under his command, Rome reached its maximum borders, incorporating Dacia, modern-day Romania, Arabia Petraea, and parts of Mesopotamia. The conquest of Dacia, in particular, was highly celebrated, bringing vast wealth to the empire and enabling the construction of great monuments, such as Trajan's Column. which commemorates his military victories. Besides his conquests, Trajan was an effective administrator, promoting the construction of infrastructure like roads, aqueducts, and ports, and implementing policies that helped the poor, such as the Alimenta, a welfare program providing food for children and orphans. Hadrian, 117–138 AD, Trajan's nephew and successor, adopted a different approach, focusing on the consolidation and defense of the empire rather than expansion. Hadrian is known for his extensive visits to the Roman provinces, where he inspected defenses and promoted administrative reforms. He is perhaps best known for building Hadrian's Wall in Britain, a fortification intended to protect the empire's northern borders against barbarian invasions. Hadrian was also a great patron of the arts and architecture, contributing to the renewal of Athens as a cultural center and promoting the construction of magnificent buildings, such as the Pantheon in Rome. His reign was marked by efficient administration, humanitarian governance, and a deep appreciation of Greek culture. Marcus Aurelius, 161–180 AD, often called the philosopher emperor, is remembered both for his military leadership and his dedication to Stoicism, a philosophy that preached virtue, duty, and emotional control. His reign, however, was marked by significant challenges, including prolonged wars on the empire's borders and a major epidemic known as the Antonine Plague, which devastated the Roman population. Despite these difficulties, Marcus Aurelius is often considered a model of virtuous governance, guided by his philosophical principles, as evidenced in his personal reflections, compiled in the book Meditations. His death marked the end of the era of emperors considered good by Roman history. The Antonine dynasty ended with Commodus, 180–192 AD, Marcus Aurelius' son, whose reign was marked by corruption, incompetence, and a growing disregard for the traditions established by his predecessors. Commodus was more interested in presenting himself as a gladiator than in effectively governing, leading to a decline in imperial authority and increased internal instability. His assassination in 192 AD plunged Rome into a new period of chaos and civil war, ending a century of relative prosperity and ushering in a new phase of challenges that would test the empire's resilience. The Antonine dynasty is often seen as a model of meritocratic leadership and effective governance, where the selection of successors based on merit rather than family ties helped sustain a long period of peace and growth. This period represented the peak of Roman power, with a vast and multicultural empire united by an efficient administrative system and an impressive network of infrastructure. The Antonine era remains one of the most revered chapters of Roman history, symbolizing the stability and glory that many associate with the height of the Roman Empire. The crisis of the 3rd century, was a period of extreme turmoil for the Roman Empire, characterized by a series of problems that threatened the very survival of the empire. This period, which lasted from 235 to 284 ADE, saw a rapid succession of emperors, many of whom were assassinated or deposed by rivals, leading to a collapse of central authority and the fragmentation of the empire. During these years, Rome faced invasions by barbarian tribes, internal usurpers, civil wars, economic collapses, and a series of devastating epidemics that further weakened the social and military fabric of the empire. The crisis began with the assassination of Emperor Alexander Severus in 235 AD by his own troops, triggering an era of soldier emperors, where generals often seized power by force, often with little political or administrative support. The empire fragmented into multiple factions, with generals and local governors establishing their own regimes in regions like Gaul, Egypt, and the East, while central control weakened. This political instability was exacerbated by continuous invasions from Germanic and Persian tribes, who took advantage of the internal disorder to raid the Roman provinces. Economically, the empire suffered from rampant inflation, partly caused by the devaluation of the Roman currency as emperors tried to finance their military campaigns and buy loyalties through the issuance of coins of lower value. This inflation, along with the breakdown of trade networks and the decline in agricultural productivity due to invasions and plague, led to a sharp decline in the standard of living for many Romans. Cities began to depopulate, and urban life declined, while communication and transportation systems deteriorated. The crisis was finally brought under control at the end of the century by Emperor Diocletian, who came to power in 284 AD. Diocletian implemented a series of comprehensive reforms to stabilize the empire, including the administrative division of the empire into a tetrarchy, in which the government was shared between 2 Augusti and 2 Caesars, for better management of the vast borders and regional crises. He also reformed the monetary system, reorganized the army, and centralized imperial administration. Diocletian's reforms provided temporary relief and marked the beginning of a new phase in Roman history, known as the Dominate, characterized by more autocratic and militarized governance. During the crisis of the 3rd century, the Roman Empire faced a series of barbarian invasions that threatened its borders and caused great devastation in various provinces. The most significant invasions came from several Germanic tribes, such as the Goths, Franks, Alemanni, and Vandals, as well as threats from the east, including the Sassanid Empire. These incursions not only challenged the Roman military capacity, but also exposed the weaknesses in the defense of the borders and the internal cohesion of the empire. The Goths, a confederation of Germanic tribes, were especially problematic during this period. In 251 ADE, they inflicted a devastating defeat on the Romans at the Battle of Abritus, where Emperor Decius was killed in combat, the first Roman emperor to die in battle against a foreign enemy. The Goths continued to raid Roman provinces, attacking Greece and even reaching Asia Minor. In response, the Romans had to reinforce their defenses and reorganize their legions, but the invasions continued to drain resources and force the empire into a defensive posture. Other Germanic tribes, such as the Franks and the Alemanni, crossed the Rhine and invaded Gaul and Hispania, while the Vandals devastated regions of North Africa and the Mediterranean islands. In the east, the Sassanid Empire under King Shapur Thorthon made deep incursions into Syria and Mesopotamia, capturing and humiliating Emperor Valerian in 260 AD, an event that shocked the Roman world and underscored the severity of external threats. The barbarian invasions of the 3rd century were a prelude to the crises that would continue to plague Rome in the following centuries, culminating in the eventual fall of the Western Roman Empire. Although Rome managed to resist these early waves of invasions, the constant pressure on the borders and the inability to maintain strong and cohesive central governance made the empire increasingly vulnerable. The invasions helped accelerate the disintegration of central authority, contributing to the collapse of the economy and the weakening of Roman social structures, creating the conditions for the mass migrations that would reshape the map of Europe. The Great Persecution, which occurred between 303 and 311 AD, was the last and one of the most severe persecutions of Christians in the Roman Empire, instigated by Emperor Diocletian. Diocletian, who had spent much of his reign attempting to restore Rome's glory and restructure the empire through administrative reforms, saw the growing Christian movement as a threat to the unity and security of the Roman state. At the time, Christians refused to participate in the worship of Roman gods and the imperial cult, practices considered essential for social cohesion and the legitimacy of imperial power. In February 303 AD, Diocletian, influenced by his co-emperor Galerius, issued a series of edicts ordering the destruction of Christian churches, the burning of sacred scriptures, and the prohibition of worship meetings. Christians were forced to offer sacrifices to the Roman gods under penalty of death, and many who refused were imprisoned, tortured, and executed. The persecution was especially intense in the eastern provinces of the empire, where Diocletian and Galerius had direct control. However, the enforcement of these orders varied in the western regions, where other members of the Tetrarchy, Constantius Chlorus, and later his son Constantine, were more lenient. Although Diocletian intended to eradicate Christianity and restore traditional Roman religiosity, the persecution failed to suppress the Christian faith, which continued to grow clandestinely. Many Christians, including bishops and community leaders, became martyrs, and their stories of sacrifice inspired and strengthened the faith of the followers. The Great Persecution officially ended in 311 AD when Galerius, gravely ill, issued an edict of tolerance that granted Christians the right to practice their religion, provided they prayed for the emperor's and the empire's well-being. This edict was a prelude to a more significant change approaching with Constantine's reign. The Battle of the Milvian Bridge, fought on October 28, 312 AD, was a decisive confrontation between Constantine and Maxentius, two rival tetrarchs vying for control of Rome and the Western Empire. The battle took place near the Milvian Bridge, an important crossing of the Tiber River on the outskirts of Rome. Constantine, marching from northern Italy, faced Maxentius' army, which had positioned itself defensively near the city. Constantine's victory not only consolidated his control over the West, but also marked a turning point in the history of Christianity. Before the battle, Constantine reported having a celestial vision. According to accounts, he saw a Christian symbol in the sky, accompanied by the words, "In hoc signo vinces," "With this sign, you shall conquer." Impressed by the vision, Constantine ordered his soldiers to decorate their shields with the Chi Rho, a monogram representing the first two letters of Christ's name in Greek. Believing that the Christian God was on his side, Constantine led his forces against Maxentius, who had the support of the traditional Roman gods. The battle was a decisive success for Constantine, with Maxentius' troops being pushed back and many drowning in the Tiber while trying to flee. Maxentius himself drowned in the river, and his defeat left Constantine as the sole ruler of the Western Empire. Constantine interpreted the victory at the Milvian Bridge as a sign of divine favor, and he began to see Christianity as a unifying and empowering force for the empire. This event was crucial for Constantine's subsequent adoption of Christianity and its promotion as a legitimate religion within the empire. The Edict of Milan, issued in 313 AD by Constantine and Licinius, was a landmark in the religious policy of the Roman Empire, decreeing freedom of worship for all religions and specifically legalizing Christianity. This edict not only officially ended the persecutions of Christians, but also restored confiscated properties and assets during the persecutions, allowing Christians to rebuild their communities and places of worship. Although often attributed to Milan, where the two emperors met to formalize the agreement, the edict was widely disseminated throughout the empire. Constantine's motivation for the Edict of Milan went beyond mere religious tolerance. He saw Christianity as a potential force to unify the empire under a new morality and spirituality. Constantine recognized the potential of the Christian faith to offer a new type of divine legitimacy to his rule, as well as to reinforce his authority as an emperor chosen by God. The edict also marked the beginning of a closer relationship between the church and the state, which would continue to deepen in the following centuries. With the legalization of Christianity, Constantine initiated a series of policies that favored the new faith, including the construction of churches and the granting of privileges to Christian leaders. He founded Constantinople, a new Christian capital in the East, which would become an important religious and political center. The relationship between Constantine and Christianity continued to shape the future of the empire, with Constantine convening the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, which sought to resolve theological disputes and establish a unified Christian doctrine. The Edict of Milan not only changed the position of Christianity within the empire, but also marked the beginning of the transition of the Roman Empire from a pagan civilization to a Christian one. From this moment on, Christianity would no longer be a persecuted religion on the fringes of the empire, but a central force in the political, cultural, and social life of Rome. This development had a profound and lasting impact, helping to shape the identity of Europe and the Western world in the centuries to come. The official division of the Roman Empire in 395 AD marked one of the most significant events in Roman history, separating the empire into two distinct entities, the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire. This division was formalized after the death of Emperor Theodosius I, the last emperor to rule the unified empire. Upon his death, Theodosius bequeathed control of the west to his son Honorius and the east to his other son Arcadius. This separation reflected both the administrative and military realities and the cultural and economic differences that already existed between the eastern and western parts of the empire. The division was an attempt to more efficiently manage the vast Roman territory, which was increasingly under pressure from barbarian invasions, internal disputes, and logistical challenges. The Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, was wealthier and more urbanized, with more solid economic resources and better organized defense. The eastern part was also better positioned to control trade routes that crossed Asia and Africa, ensuring a more stable fiscal base. In contrast, the Western Roman Empire, with its capital eventually established in Ravenna, faced greater financial, military, and political difficulties. The division formalized the growing estrangement between the two halves of the empire, which had already been operating semi-independently for some time. The challenges faced by the West, including the loss of control over Gaul, Britain, and Hispania, along with increasing pressure from Germanic peoples and other barbarian tribes, significantly weakened its ability to defend its borders and maintain territorial integrity. This division, though initially seen as a practical solution, ultimately accelerated the decline of the West, which could not withstand external and internal pressures as effectively as the East. In 410 AD, the Western Roman Empire suffered a devastating blow when Rome, the city that had been the heart of the empire for centuries, was sacked by the Visigoths under the leadership of their king, Alaric. This invasion marked the first time in nearly 800 years that Rome fell into the hands of a foreign enemy, symbolizing the growing weakening of the Western Empire and the vulnerability that had established itself on its borders. The Visigoths, a Germanic people who had migrated into the empire during the 4th century seeking refuge from the Huns, had a long history of conflict with Rome, aggravated by mismanagement and the Roman inability to honor agreements made with them. Alaric, who had previously served as an officer in the Roman army, led the Visigoths in several campaigns against the empire, frustrated by Rome's refusal to grant land and status to his people. After several attempts at negotiation, and after being repeatedly betrayed and slighted by Roman leaders, Alaric marched against Rome, besieging and finally invading the city in August 410 AD. For 3 days, the Visigoths plundered Rome, destroying and looting many of its treasures, but sparing Christian churches, respecting sacred sites, and showing a certain deference to the new religious norms of the empire. The sack of Rome caused shock and horror throughout the Roman world and beyond. Although the physical impact of the sack was moderate compared to what one might expect from a barbarian invasion, the psychological and symbolic impact was immense. Rome, which for centuries had been seen as the invincible capital of the civilized world, was now vulnerable and exposed, shaking the Roman people's faith in the empire's ability to defend itself. This event demonstrated the extent of internal decay and the impotence of the Western government in dealing with external threats, paving the way for the gradual collapse of the Western Roman Empire. The 5th century witnessed the accelerated decline of the Western Roman Empire, which struggled to maintain control over its territories while facing a series of internal crises and external invasions. With constant barbarian incursions, the loss of territories became inevitable. Once prosperous regions such as Gaul, Britain, and Hispania gradually fell under the control of Germanic tribes, including the Franks, Visigoths, and Vandals. The central Roman authority was eroded by its inability to protect its borders and efficiently administer its provinces, leading to increasing political fragmentation and economic collapse. The internal weakening of the empire also manifested in the deterioration of government institutions and growing corruption among Roman leaders. The succession of emperors was marked by intrigue, assassinations, and usurpations, with many emperors being mere puppets of powerful generals or political factions. The absence of stable government and the lack of an efficient army made the empire vulnerable to external threats and internal revolts. The growing reliance on barbarian mercenaries for the empire's defense, including Visigoths, Franks, and Alans, also undermined the cohesion and loyalty of the Roman armed forces. One of the final blows to the Western Empire was the loss of control over North Africa, a region vital for grain supply. In 439 AD, Zion, the Vandals, led by Genseric, captured Carthage, becoming a powerful naval force that challenged Roman supremacy in the Western Mediterranean. The loss of North Africa deprived Rome of important economic resources and contributed to the growing famine and urban decline in Italian cities. Attempts to reconquer these lands failed, illustrating the empire's inability to effectively respond to these crises. The final collapse of the Western Roman Empire is generally dated to 476 AD, when the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustus Daurs, was deposed by Odoacer, a Germanic leader who declared himself king of Italy. This event is traditionally seen as the formal end of the Western Roman Empire, although many aspects of Roman culture and administration continued under the barbarian kingdoms that succeeded the empire. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, continued to flourish for another 1,000 years, preserving many elements of Roman civilization and serving as a bastion of Roman culture and authority in the East. The decline of the Western Roman Empire was a complex and multifaceted process, driven by economic, military, social, and political factors. Rome's inability to adapt to the dynamic changes of its time, the growing pressure from barbarian migrations, and internal divisions eroded the empire's strength, transforming it from an invincible power into a weakened and fragmented state. However, the legacy of the Roman Empire endured through its culture, laws, and influence on the civilizations that emerged in post-Roman Europe. While the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD with the deposition of Romulus Augustulus, the Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, continued to thrive and develop, surviving as the Byzantine Empire. This empire maintained many Roman traditions, including administration, law, and culture, but gradually evolved into a state with more Greek and Eastern characteristics. The strategic location of Constantinople, situated between Europe and Asia, provided the empire with a vantage point for trade, diplomacy, and defense against invasions, becoming one of the wealthiest and most fortified cities of the medieval world. The continuity of the Byzantine Empire was ensured by a combination of effective governance, a resilient economy, and a powerful military structure. The empire developed a complex administrative system, with a highly organized bureaucracy that helped maintain internal cohesion and fiscal efficiency. Militarily, the empire innovated with defensive tactics and advanced technologies, such as Greek fire, a feared incendiary weapon. Additionally, the Byzantines employed sophisticated diplomacy, using alliances, bribes, and dynastic marriages to avoid direct confrontations whenever possible. Religiously, the Byzantine Empire played a central role in the development and propagation of Orthodox Christianity. The Orthodox Church became a fundamental institution in the empire, exerting both spiritual and political influence. Constantinople was seen as the center of Christian orthodoxy, with the Byzantine emperor assuming the role of defender of the faith and patron of the church. This close relationship between the state and religion helped shape Byzantine identity, differentiating it from Western Christianity and contributing to the formation of a unique culture that combined Roman, Greek, and Christian elements. Emperor Justinian Oies, who ruled from 527 to 565 AD, was one of the most ambitious and influential figures of the Byzantine Empire, dedicating himself to the grand task of restoring the former Roman Empire in the West. Justinian sought to revive Rome's glory through a series of military campaigns, legal reforms, and monumental construction projects. His most famous general, Belisarius, led the Byzantine forces in successful campaigns that resulted in the reconquest of vast areas of the former Western Empire, including North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain. These temporary conquests rekindled the hope of a reunification of the Roman world under Byzantine rule. One of Justinian's greatest achievements was the compilation of the Corpus Juris Civilis, or Justinian's Code, a monumental codification of Roman laws that had a lasting impact on the development of law throughout the Western world. This collection of laws consolidated and reformed previous legislation, becoming the basis for civil law in many European nations centuries later. Additionally, Justinian sponsored an extensive series of construction projects, including the reconstruction of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, which became one of the world's most impressive architectural monuments and a lasting symbol of Byzantine power and faith. Despite these successes, Justinian's dream of restoring the complete empire proved unsustainable in the long term. The military campaigns exhausted the empire's resources, which faced increasing financial pressures and a population devastated by plagues, including the plague of Justinian Bari, a pandemic that caused millions of deaths and significantly weakened the Byzantine workforce and army. Moreover, Justinian's conquests were continually threatened by barbarian invasions and internal rebellions, which eventually led to the loss of many of the reconquered territories after his death. Justinian's reign is often seen as the peak of the Byzantine Empire in terms of ambition and reach, representing a final effort to resurrect the former glory of Rome. Although his conquests were largely reversible after his death, his legal and cultural achievements left a lasting legacy that continued to influence the empire and the world beyond. The Eastern Roman Empire, which survived as the Byzantine Empire for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of Rome, finally met its end in 1453 AD, with the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire. The capture of Constantinople marked the definitive end of the Roman Empire, which had been a bastion of civilization and classical culture since its foundation. The siege of Constantinople, led by Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, was a decisive event that not only ended the empire, but also symbolized the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of a new era of Ottoman dominance in the Eastern Mediterranean. Although still formidable, Constantinople was ill-equipped to withstand the Ottoman assault. The empire had been reduced to little more than the city itself and some surrounding territories. After centuries of decline and territorial losses to invaders such as the Arabs, Bulgarians, and Seljuk Turks. In 1453, the city was surrounded by Ottoman forces far superior in number and armament, including the use of large cannons, a new technology that played a crucial role in destroying the city's walls. After a siege of about 2 months, Ottoman forces breached the city's defenses on May 29, 1453. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine V Palaiologos, died defending his city, and the conquest was followed by 3 days of looting. Mehmed II, who called himself the Conqueror, triumphantly entered Constantinople and transformed the Hagia Sophia into a mosque, symbolizing the transition of power from Christian to Islamic rule. The city was renamed Istanbul and became the new capital of the burgeoning Ottoman Empire, which would become one of the world's greatest powers. The fall of Constantinople had profound repercussions for Europe and the Islamic world. It marked the end of the last vestige of the Roman Empire and the beginning of a new era of Ottoman hegemony in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans. Many Byzantine scholars and artists fled to the West, bringing with them knowledge that would help fuel the European Renaissance. Culturally, the end of Constantinople represented the closure of a chapter in Orthodox Christian history, and the city continued to be a center of trade and culture under Ottoman rule. While the Byzantine Empire fell, its legacy endured through the influence of Roman law, the preservation of classical culture, and the Orthodox Christian faith, which continued to shape the development of European and Middle Eastern societies. The fall of Constantinople remains one of the most important events in world history, marking the end of an era and the beginning of new power dynamics that would shape the course of the following centuries. The complete history of the Roman Empire, from its legendary foundation to the final fall of Constantinople, is an epic tale of rise, power, decline, and transformation. Beginning as a small city-state on the Italian peninsula, Rome grew to become one of the greatest powers of ancient history, conquering vast territories and unifying a diverse array of peoples under a common banner. Through its political, military, and cultural institutions, Rome not only shaped the ancient world, but also left a lasting legacy that continued to influence civilizations for millennia. Rome's transition from a republic to an empire brought both glory and challenges, with emperors like Augustus laying the foundation for an era of peace and prosperity, while others, like Nero, symbolized the excesses and failures of an autocratic regime. The territorial conquests of emperors like Trajan expanded the empire to its greatest borders, but the constant pressure of barbarian invasions, internal crises, and the division of the empire into western and eastern halves foreshadowed its decline. The fall of Rome in 476 AD was not the end of the Roman legacy. The Byzantine Empire continued to flourish in the east, preserving and adapting the Roman heritage until the conquest of Constantinople by the Ottomans in 1453. Throughout its more than 1,000 years of existence, the Roman Empire faced monumental challenges, from internal revolts to external invasions, and continually adapted to changing circumstances. Although the empire eventually succumbed, its impact on law, governance, architecture, engineering, and culture remained indelible. The history of Rome is a testament to the complexity of power, the resilience of institutions, and the human capacity to create and destroy. It is a narrative of greatness and tragedies that continues to captivate and inspire the modern world, reminding us of the lessons of the past as we shape the future. If you enjoyed exploring this epic journey through the history of the Roman Empire, don't forget to like, follow the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any new content. Share this video with your friends and leave your comment below. Which part of the history of Rome did you find most fascinating? Your opinion is super important to us, so leave a comment and let's continue this conversation in the comments. Let's explore the past together and learn more about the civilizations that shaped the world.